everybody, Andrew Champagne here with this week's edition of Champagne and JD. No JD this week, unfortunately, a little bit under the weather, so hopefully he gets better soon. But we've got a great guest coming up this week, and as JD often hates me saying, and I need to say it because he's still going to be editing this, she needs no introduction. I'm going to give her one anyway because that's just the kind of guy I am. But in the words of Pablo Picasso, bad artists copy, good artists steal. I am going to steal the words used by our guest's boss. Natalie Voss is no ordinary journalist. I've had the opportunity to work with some very good writers and editors in racing over the years. None has been guided by a stronger moral compass in the areas of equine welfare, aftercare, safety, and integrity in our sport. That is Ray Paulick and our guest this week, now three-time Eclipse Award winner, Natalie Voss. Natalie, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me on.
I was hoping to make it break up a little bit when I read that, but
it's still just like I can't even tell you, like, I wanted to work for and with Ray from the time that I was a kid reading The Blood Horse, and so like reading him saying that on Twitter was just like, oh my gosh, like, is this real life? So I'm still just sort of shocked by that description, but very honored, of course.
Well, you've got a lot of good reason to be honored because nobody in the last 30 years has done what you did, sweeping the Eclipse Award media categories, the last one to do it. Guy by the name of Bill Knack, one of the great turf writers in the history of our industry. Take us through the moments in which you found out what you had done and what you had won and when it hit you as far as the magnitude of that moment.
Well, So I have been through this once before. I won an Eclipse in 2016, and so I remembered from last time that typically if you're the winner, you get a call somewhere between just before Christmas or just before New Year's. And I know the guy who calls the winners, Jim Gluckson, who does press relations for NTRA and for the Readers' Cup. And so I saw his number pop up on my phone, and it was like December 30th or whatever. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's exciting. Could not have imagined that he was going to be telling me that I won two. And dear Jim is a very professional guy. And so he had his little spiel of like, you know, it is my job to tell you that you have won two awards. And I just sort of started like yelling at him. Like, that isn't true. Like, you're making this up. This isn't a real thing. And bless him, he just kind of just kept continuing with it, with his spiel that he had to get through, even though I was like just sort of like shouting at him on the phone. Because that had never occurred to me. I didn't know at the time whether anybody had done it before or not. I knew that I had certainly never heard of it, which is why I wasn't totally convinced that could even be a thing. But it turns out that Knack did it before. Of course, I would like to point out for poor Bill Knack's sake, it was a very different, turf writing landscape in those days. It was the early 90s. You had a lot more newspapers writing about racing on a regular basis. You had trade publications with much larger staffs. So I don't think it's quite fair to him to sort of harken back to being the only other person to do it. He had a lot of competition. I had a lot of really good competition. The turf writers who remain are amazing, but there just aren't as many of them as there once were. But anyway, still, it's very, very exciting, obviously.
I can imagine. And I know that one of the people who was happiest of all is your husband, a friend of the program, one of my dear friends, a guy named Joe Nevels, who a lot of people out there might know. He actually won his Eclipse Award last year in 2019 for the piece that he wrote on Mount Pleasant Meadows. What was it like for you to be able to share that moment with him and realize, wait a minute, combined, we've won 4 of these things?
that was a little surreal. I didn't do the math right away because I was still just kind of trying to grasp the situation. He was, of course, very excited for me. He's like amazingly supportive as a fellow teammate at the Paulick Report as well as a husband. And so he was just delighted. And I made him pinch me actually, because I was just like, I'm still not sure this is real. So he just sort of like poked me and I'm like, well, that isn't going to wake me up if I'm asleep. So then he like really pinched my arm. So it was a little bit of chaos for a good 10 minutes or so. And then it was like, oh, well, I guess now what do we do? Because of course you also can't really tell anybody. They call you and then they interview you for the press release, but then you can't really tell anyone until the press release comes out. I was allowed to tell Ray, and I called my mom, and that was it. but it was sort of like, oh gosh, now I have to keep this secret. That's going to be weird.
Well, you did a good job with it. And then when the release came out and the outpouring of support came in, it's always nice when the horse racing community is allowed to rally around people that deserve it. And there were a couple of pieces that you wrote over the past year that certainly deserved this type of honor, this kind of recognition. We'll dive in a little bit now and talk about each of these stories. First of all, the one that won in the feature commentary division was your story about Inked, a horse that had been running in the claiming ranks and had a heck of a journey going back to ultimately his exercise rider. Tell us how you first came to check out this story and some of the things that you encountered while writing and reporting about it.
Yeah, so we got an email at the Paulick report from Kirsten Fada, who is the exercise rider who had ridden him when he was a baby. She broke him out as a yearling, rode him on the track as a 2-year-old, and then he was claimed away from the barn that she worked in. And when she wrote to us, she had just reunited with him. She had a riding horse that she was boarding at a facility here in Kentucky, that Moserwood Farm. Moserwood also has horses that board there from Second Stride Thoroughbred Adoption Program, and they had just gotten some horses in, and she had no idea where the horse was. She knew that he'd been claimed. He disappeared off the radar as far as she was concerned. He'd stopped putting in workouts. And then somebody told her, oh, I think one of the horses that just came in, I think that one of the names is Inked. And she was like, that's my horse. And so when she emailed me, this had all kind of just happened, and she had posted about it on Facebook. And then after her Facebook post went viral, she got connected with his breeder, who had also had purchased him to retire him, who had sent him through the Second Stride program, having no idea that Kirsten was on the other end looking for him also. She was also contacted by Hannah Meyer, who sort of is a jack of all trades. She does equine transport, she ponies horses, she works on the track, and she knew the horse. She had transported the horse between his sort of stopover in South Dakota and Kentucky for his retirement. She was going to take the horse, but then COVID kind of got in her way, and he ended up at Moserwood where he met Kirsten. So she had just sort of made connections with these people that she didn't know existed, that had been part of the horse's journey and coming back to her. And so then I was able to reach them because of the power of social media, basically. And it was crazy to just sort of hear the way the story had unfolded and to check in with each of them and what their timelines had been, what they were doing relative to the horse at different times without knowing that the other ones were working. And it was just amazing. So as far as I was concerned, my job as a writer was just to kind of like, don't screw this up, because it's such a crazy good story. And, you couldn't have written fiction like this, really. But this happened, this dropped in my lap, like, just don't mess it up was kind of my objective with it. And I was pleased that it came out well.
It's remarkable how many different sets of hands are on a horse when a horse is going through his racing career, especially when you're talking about horses that are in the claiming ranks and go around from barn to barn, sometimes circuit to circuit. And it's amazing how even when you try to track some of these horses, sometimes they're hard to track. Sometimes horses fall off the work tab. You don't necessarily know if they've been turned out, if they're hurt, if they're recovering, whatever the case may be. I just can't get over the fact that it was like, hey, wait a minute. Let me check my email here. Wait, what? You're like, was it a story where you were just talking to these people and your jaw just dropped as you were looking down, checking to see, oh, is this recording? Is this recording? Please don't break, recorder. Please don't break.
Yeah, it was very much like that. And it just sort of, she had sent a pretty detailed email, but still, like, as the details of how everything happened kind of unfolded in our conversation, I forgot that I was interviewing somebody, really, because it was just like, I just want to know what happens next, like, as the observer. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good start, I suppose, to putting together a story. And I think a lot of people, can relate to that aspect of things for her. Like, you have a horse that you're a fan of, whether from a distance or whether it's a horse that you had some connection to, and that feeling of suddenly realizing, oh, I haven't gotten a notification in like a few weeks. A lot of times by the time you realize you haven't gotten a notification, they're not where they last were anymore. They're either turned out or retired or gone. And then that just sort of like, pit in your stomach of like, I wish I knew, but I don't know how to figure it out. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I certainly could. So it was wonderful to hear a story where everything turned out right in the end.
That's for sure. Always good to see a happy ending. Now, the next set of stories we're going to talk about, I remember reading these And I remember buzzing Joe saying, "Yep, make room. This one's going to win." It was a three-part series on a bunch of different aspects of thoroughbred aftercare, past, present, future, sit downs with a bunch of people who knew what they're talking about. It by no means is it a quick read, and I mean that in the best possible way because there's just so much substance, and you can read and reread and reread and get so much different stuff out of it in so many different sittings. How much of a challenge was that to put all of that together in this three-part series that ultimately won the News Enterprise Award? And was it ever a case where there were these big, huge challenges in your place where you were it was almost a case of like, I know I've experienced this as a writer, a lot of writers out there, I'm sure I've experienced this, how the heck do I make sense of all of this? Because this is not a light topic. This is not a topic where somebody has gone out there and essentially given a roadmap for this. This is one of those things that as horse racing fans, we all agree aftercare is important, but then you go look for a how-to, and there's a couple of farms that are doing a tremendous job, but there's a lot of efforts out there that are under the radar, and there are a lot of efforts out there that unfortunately sometimes don't get the support that they need.
Right. Yeah. So I think that I struggled, as you identified with how to organize this and also like people have sort of different levels of familiarity with some of these issues. So trying to make it accessible for all readers was kind of a challenge as well. I had really good feedback from Ray Paulick and Scott Jagow was our editor-in-chief at that time because this came out in late 2019. And they were really good. And Joe is always really good for bouncing stuff like this off of too. He's good at organizing things, like if you hand him a bunch of kind of nonsensical stuff, like the junk drawer you have with all your cords in it, and you just kind of like pull out this just like chunk of stuff. If you send him like the intellectual version of that, then he can untangle everything because he has the patience and skills to do that. And when you're in the middle of the like thing of cords, you can't look at it anymore because you've looked at it too long and you just can't make sense of it. So he is very good for that kind of thing. What we sort of ended up landing on, because we were trying to figure out like, we have to look at the good and the bad. And what we try to do at the Paulick Report whenever we're doing any sort of investigative story on a complicated issue is to try to offer solutions so that we're not just kind of like, look at this thing, it's terrible, bye, because that's not very helpful. So we ended up sort of making it kind of, here's what's going well, here's what's going less well, here is what we can do. And that's sort of how the third part of it came about. And that also kind of helped thin out the content of the other two pieces because you're trying to fit solutions in with problems. It gets really, really long, really fast. So that's sort of how we arrived at doing it the way that we did it. But yeah, it seemed like a good moment for that because aftercare has kind of become a bigger and bigger thing in the last 10 years. And I think that I do encounter a little bit, maybe not directly, but like a little bit of an attitude of like, well, we've got this taken care of now, right? Like we have all these programs and we have all these organizations and like everything's cool. And I just kind of keep thinking about how many thousands of horses are born every year and how many don't make it, and make it as far as like, have a stud career, have a broodmare career when they're done. Those others have to go somewhere. So I've kind of been thinking, I think this is maybe more complicated and a larger scale problem than a lot of people really realize. And we are doing a great job compared to 10 years ago, but it's not over with yet as far as like getting everything out there that's needed.
I'm happy you brought up the notion of, hey, there are tens of thousands of thoroughbreds that are born every year in the US, in Europe, in Japan, in South Korea, which is launching an American style program with a bunch of imported stallions that they've brought over there. Yeah, a couple of them make it. A couple of them get Eclipse Awards. Some of the males go on to stud careers. What happens to the other 90% of them? That's the mission of aftercare right there. And if you're a horse player, if you're anybody that has any interest in the game, this is something you need to pay attention to, because it's not something where if you have any level of investment in the game, you can just ignore this. You can't. We have obligations to make sure, hey, if these horses entertain us, we should probably make sure they have some sort of comfortable living when they're done. And that doesn't hit me as the toughest concept to understand, But it wasn't long ago we heard the story of what happened to Ferdinand over in Japan. And that's not something that I bring up lightly or quickly for that matter. But it only takes one story like that for aftercare to become a gigantic issue and for racing's naysayers to point fingers and say, see, we told you. And that's a gigantic problem.
Yeah, I think if anything, Santa Anita fatalities should have taught us by now that, like, when the outside world looks at something, they do not always look at a problem the same way that we do on the inside of racing. And you have to be able to point to, here's what we're doing to try to address this. And we do have a lot of things, like I said, that we're doing to try to address the aftercare issue. We do have a lot of things we can point to. But when a horse ends up in a bad situation, and the mainstream public sees that, they don't really want to hear you say, well, we tried to do everything we could. That doesn't seem adequate to them if the horse is in a really, really bad spot. So I think we have to think more and more in the modern world. Social media has made everybody more interconnected and made it easier to share stories and pictures and videos that, what we do after the horses leave the track matters just as much as when they're on the track, because to the rest of the world, it's still our responsibility. That may not be fair, but that's how they look at it. And it's kind of a hard thing to argue them out of from their perspective. So we need to take that seriously, that what we do is getting seen by people beyond what it did, 20, 30 years ago.
Good rule of thumb. If you can't explain your point to someone who knows nothing about your process in 15 to 20 seconds, you're doing it wrong. And that's something that I think horse racing struggles to deal with on a couple of different things. Here's a fun game. Try to explain takeout and breakage to someone who has never placed a bet before. Go.
Yeah, that's not a task I want.
Somewhere. But no, it's one of those things where it certainly needs a spotlight in as many different ways as we can put it on there. You did a tremendous job, of course, and we're happy to help as well, which leads into the next question. There are organizations out there that are doing a tremendous, outstanding job. There are a couple that the average racing fan probably knows about. Old Friends being one of the most prominent. That is, of course, where Silver Charm currently lives, where a bunch of horses that had a lot of glory during their racing years live out their final days. Michael Blowen, tremendous job. There's a couple of different Old Friends facilities scattered around the country. There's one in upstate New York, Cabin Creek. What are some of the other foundations that people can research and ultimately, if they feel inclined, support with monetary donations?
I think the way that I would suggest people go about it is to go to the website for the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and see what's in your state, what accredited facility is closest to you. Because if you can also give to the TAA and they distribute funds to their accredited programs. But if what you want is to sort of make a big difference to the program that's just down the road from you, that's a good way to screen, is that organization that says they work with thoroughbreds, is somebody looking over their shoulder to make sure that their accounting is what it should be and that their horse care practices are what they should be. And I think that's probably the best way to go about finding something that you haven't heard of before, is just to say, like, what can I change in my local community and use that as a resource, because they have accredited facilities in a lot more states than they used to. It used to be very Kentucky centric, of course, because that's where a lot of them started. But I think they have something in, a good percentage, if not all. I don't think maybe all of the states that have pari-mutuel racing right now, but probably close to. They have an ever growing list of accredited facilities. So I would say to check that out. That's your best way to go.
And that website, just for reference, having just looked it up to make sure I was right, is www.thoroughbredaftercare.org. And again, that directory is there. Anybody that wants to research that can. It's a fantastic resource if you want to support some of these thoroughbreds that, in some cases, may need your help. We're not going to touch on this story too much, but there was a big one a couple of years ago with an organization that claimed to be doing a whole lot, and in reality, wasn't doing a whole heck of a lot. We're not going to touch on that too much. Less said about that, the better. But it does drive home the point of, look, you want to do your research and make sure you know where your money is going. Unfortunately, there are some bad people in the world, and it's one of those situations where you want to know where your money is going and you want to know that it's going to help horses in need. Because ultimately, I think anyone that cares about this game cares about these horses. This is a darn good way to show that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So On a slightly happier note, though, we're going to segue back into the Eclipse Awards discussion. And this is something that Joe and I have talked about a little bit.
Oh
So
boy.
you won one, he won one. You've now won two more. I see a couple of the trophies back there in the set that you guys have constructed. There's another writer in the Neville's clan. Her name is Jitterbug. She writes for Chronicle of the Horse. If Jitterbug wins an Eclipse Award, is Joe the third best writer in the Neville's clan, despite being a top 2 or 3 turf writer in all of horse racing?
I mean, if Jitterbug wins an Eclipse Award, it's going to be from probably the only thoroughbred related piece that she's ever done, because she is not a pure thoroughbred. She is half Percheron, half thoroughbred. So she doesn't really write about racing, but if she did, she would be serious competition for all of us.
I'm just saying she should. I think there's room for opportunity there. And if there's one thing that I have read, is that when she sets her mind to disrupting something, she does.
Yeah, God help me. She sure does.
So we transitioned into some of the horses that Natalie is fortunate to deal with. We're going to talk about Underscore now. And this is a story that if you know this story, it's going to bring a smile to your face. And if you don't, you're probably going to want to rewatch this. So this goes back a ways. This goes back not just to when Underscore was born and sold, but when a relative of Underscore stole your heart. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so when I was in college and just out of college, I would make extra money by working at the thoroughbred auctions on the weekends or whatever days I had off. And I was fortunate to work for a consignment out of Canada called Cara Bloodstock with Bernard McCormick. And bless him, he was very patient at teaching me, because I did not have a ton of experience when I first started doing this. I had done the sales, I think, like once as part of my college program. But anyway, he sort of brought me along, and he had really well-prepared horses most of the time, which made my life a lot easier. And, you know, you handle them for a couple days. You're there to groom them. You show them to buyers. You sort of get paired up with one or two that are kind of like the ones that you're with. And you're with them, you know, for 12, 14-hour days for 3 or 4 days. And then they sell, and then you move on to the next group. And so I sort of like handled a lot of horses this way. And I had some that I were sort of favorites. I had some that it was like, yeah, you're going to be a really good racehorse, and I'm ready to hand you to somebody else because you're driving me crazy. But there was one filly who I just absolutely loved. She had like such a good brain on her for being a yearling filly, and a chestnut filly. And usually chestnut fillies have a bit of a reputation as being a little impatient, but she was really calm. She was really confident. Like, if you wanted to stand there and snuggle with her, you could, but she also wasn't kind of dependent on you emotionally. If you put her sort of in her spot, she'd stand there and wait till you told her to do something else. If something unexpected happened, like a loose horse, she'd kind of like, you know, look around and process the situation and not panic. And I thought, you know, the only other horse that I know who processes the world that way is my horse, is Jitterbug. And so I loved this filly, and she was there for her breeders. She did not make her reserve at Keeneland September. She came back in Phasig October, and I got to groom her again. She did not make her reserve there either, so her breeders kept her and raced her, and she was actually their very first stakes winner. I told them going in, like, she's either going to be really good at this, because if she sets her mind to it, she's gonna be good, or she's really not going to want to do the work, because she was a great fan of napping. Like, she'd wait until she realized there's kind of a lull in the sale, and then if I walked off to go do something, I'd come back and she's just like splayed out on her side in the straw. Like, all the other horses are still kind of, you know, oh, we're at the sale, there's all this noise, there's all this stuff happening. She's just like snoring in the straw. I'm just like, she's either very good at conserving energy, or she wants no part of anything that takes work. I'm not sure which. But as it turns out, she was a really good racehorse. So at the end of her career, she didn't need me. She was going to be a broodmare. And she went actually back home to the farm where she was born, and her people, her breeders, are the ones who handle her and foal out the babies. And so she has a wonderful life. But I was really curious to see what the first foal was going to be like, because I just thought, man, that brain, I just can't get over how good her brain is. And I've worked with many horses since then. They just don't have that brain. And so I was excited to see her first baby, who's an Uncle Mo who went to Phasig, Saratoga. And I thought, don't get too excited, because just because he's related to her doesn't mean he's like her. You know, he's his own creature. And I sort of hung out at the barn with him, and I'm like, nah, he's the same brain, just a different package. And so I followed him throughout his career. And this is a very long story. Sorry.
Don't apologize. This is
So he was purchased by Godolphin at that sale. $400,000. His mom RNA'd for 49 or 59, I believe, the first time, by the way. So that paid off really nicely for the breeders. They were really surprised by that. I think they expected him to do well, but not quite that well. And I was excited that Godolphin got him because I knew that they had sort of a very good in-house aftercare program. So I was like, oh, great. Even if he's not good at this, he's going to be just fine. I didn't think about it at the time that I was at the sale, but actually my eventing coach works with Godolphin's program. That's where she gets a lot of her sale prospect horses as off-the-track sport horse prospects. And then I sort of started to realize, oh, that means she has a contact there. And I went to school with somebody who's there. So I would check in with them sort of periodically and be like, hey, how's he doing? And, he just kind of kept getting dogged by injuries, really minor stuff. So he ended up starting once, bless him. He was like fourth at Oaklawn. He did okay. He got dirt in his face and was like, nobody told me about this. Like, this is not what I signed up for. Backed right off. But, he tried. And I just kind of kept bugging them like, he hasn't worked out in a little while. If he's not going to work out for you guys, then you know who you can call. And in November, I got the call. And so he's turned out in a field like 10 minutes from my house. I still can't believe it.
It's been a couple of months. I know both you and Joe are really excited to be able to work with him. Do you have any plans as far as what his next career might be?
So it's a little early to say. He's waiting for a stall at the property where I have Jitterbug. The place where I have him right now doesn't have a riding arena. So I haven't sat on him yet because I want to wait until we're in kind of a controlled surface and in something that's fenced in, ideally, just in case that first ride gets a little more exciting than I would like it to. So it's hard to know without sitting on him. But I do know that, like, so far he's very much like his mother. He's very calm about everything. We've sort of been trying to present him with different sort of items and obstacles on the ground while we are sort of unable to ride him. So we've learned about tarps. We can walk over tarps now. We don't think that's so scary. We learned about umbrellas last weekend. Umbrellas are terrifying to horses, by the way. Like, there are a lot of things they don't like all into one package. They're a bright colored thing that makes noise and bobs around unpredictably. Like, they don't like any of these things. He just sort of looked at the umbrella and was like, I'm hungry. Can I eat that? Like, what is the problem here? I don't know why you're staring at me about this. So we're just sort of trying to, like, show him unusual stuff, like walk over some poles on the ground. And I'm not encountering any obstacles yet as far as, like, oh, he doesn't like this particular type of situation or item or something that's going to make a type of jump more difficult for him to do later or anything. I'm not encountering any limitations yet. He seems like he just sort of takes everything in stride. So we'll see. We're going to enter the makeover for 2021, but I'm not sure if we'll make it because we'll get kind of a later start under saddle than what I would like. And if we don't make it, we don't make it. But that is something that, is a possibility for later this year. We'll see.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that goes on. It's such a cool story. It's out there online in full if you want to read about it, if you want to see some pretty cool photos. Any plans to introduce Underscore to Jitterbug?
Eventually they will have to meet, and I don't know if the universe will implode or I don't know what will happen. She's a very jealous horse. She does not like for me to be messing with anybody else. She will stop eating to come over and make noise at her stall door if she sees me at somebody else's stall door. So I'm not totally sure how that introduction is going to go because I'm going to be giving attention to this new guy, and she's not going to love that. So I'm sure they will meet. I'm not sure if they will be friends or not. We will have to see.
I'm just saying that might be Jitterbug's avenue to an Eclipse Award. That's technically a thoroughbred.
That's true. That's a good point. And she will want to teach him because, her column in the Chronicle is about teaching humans. And this is the next generation of who's going to be teaching her humans. So I think that I tend to believe she's going to get over her jealousy and then realize this is an opportunity. I've got to mold this kid. Like, he's too nice. And then, God help me.
Humans, or as she calls them, bipeds sometimes.
Bipeds, yes.
Yes. So it'll be fun to see where that goes. I hope Underscore is a writer, just like his sister, but we'll see. Plenty of time to try to mold him into something down the line, whether that's a writer, whether that's an event horse. We'll see. It's going to be fun, and I know he's in good hands. So that's absolutely tremendous. It's a really cool story. We're up to our final thought segment, wherein we usually give our guests a little bit of free rein as far as stuff they'd like to talk about, stuff they'd like to bring attention to, different things that they're excited about, different things that they've got going on. Natalie, the floor is yours before I go rant about something going on at this place back here.
Oh, Saratoga, I miss it so much. Well, I mean, my sort of thing that I'm trying to get more attention for right now is aftercare, but we've sort of gone through that quite a bit already. I guess I'm not really sure. Joe and Ray just did their where I guess not this current Friday, but the past Friday on the Friday show, they did their kind of bold predictions for 2021, and I guess sort of my general final thought is that this is going to be an interesting year for racing, considering what 2020 brought upon us between COVID and the federal indictments. So I guess we've got a lot of change ahead of us in the sport. I would just, from a journalist perspective, I think I would just sort of encourage people to look at coverage that is tougher, that might be coming this year. You know, I'm an investigative reporter. Very little of what I do is particularly light and fluffy. I'm sure there'll be more of that. There'll be more need for that as this year goes on, just like any other. I think I would just sort of encourage people out there to, as we look forward to these changes that are coming, not to shy away from the uncomfortable as far as looking at topics like aftercare, looking at topics like drug issues in racing, the federal indictment, the federal bill, all that kind of stuff. Like we sometimes get feedback of, why can't you write anything pleasant? Well, we do try to write pleasant stuff also, but yeah, I'm of the very strong opinion that news is not positive or negative. It is just reality. And if I don't report on it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So let's just sort of go into whatever's coming, knowing that it's not all going to be, lovely and fluffy, but that it is from that which we grow. And that kind of hard look at complicated topics is important and should continue. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity for it to do so as we move into whatever in the world 2021 has got for us. So sort of a complicated final thought, but that's something that I think about a lot as a reporter. So
I am all for that. And that echoes a statement that Alicia Wins-Hughes made on our show a couple of months ago. If you want racing to be a mainstream big time sport, you don't get to pick and choose what the media covers.
Yeah.
So want to make that trade-off? Think about it before you say that. Now,
absolutely.
My final thought centers around one axiom and one axiom only. If it's not broken, don't fix it. One of my favorite places in the world is this place right back here, Saratoga Racecourse. You may well know that I am the 4-time reigning, defending, undisputed handicapping champion in the pink sheet. But I'm an opinionated person as it comes to where I watch the races when I'm there. One of my favorite spots is the Paddock Bar, which, fittingly enough, is right by the paddock. There's a Shake Shack right there. It's a really easy place for people to congregate and have a good time at the races. It came out this week. NYRA is considering putting forth a 2-story structure in that space, wherein the first floor would be completely enclosed and the second floor would be something for group sales. NYRA, if anyone from NYRA is watching this show, please don't do this. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Saratoga was not built as the track with a whole bunch of buildings. Saratoga was built on going outside, getting the fresh air, enjoying everything an upstate New York summer day has to offer outside, and being able to float around in a whole bunch of different spots on the track. The Paddock Bar was a tremendous addition about 10 years ago when they put it in. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Nice, easy, succinct, and fairly controversy-free compared to a couple of different things that I've done in this final thought segment in the past. So, once again, we're really happy to have Natalie Voss with us this week. JD, feel better, buddy. Natalie, where can people follow you online? On the Paulick Report, I know, is one of the big things that you do. Any big stories that you've got in the works that you want to maybe draw some eyeballs to in the next week or so?
I'm not sure yet. I'm working on a few different things, but as the typical investigative reporter, I can't say too much yet. So, and I'm also not sure when any of it will come out because you just never know when you start researching a story where all it's going to take you before it's ready to go. So I'm afraid I can't really push anything like that coming up.
You also want to protect your shot at a 4th Eclipse Award too. Let's be real.
Well, that hadn't particularly occurred to me, quite honestly, because that's insane. But
your agent should be telling you this. Your agent should be pumping you up and say, okay, you got 3, go for 4, go for 4, go for 4, go for 4. Joe, where are you? Are you learning from this? I shouldn't have to be teaching you this stuff.
He actually does say that to me quite frequently, and I just sort of like shake my head at him because it's so much like it's like showing horses. You just do the best. You go in, you've done the best work that you can. You have no control over what everybody else is going to do. So why worry about it? Like, just be the best you can be. I think that's the army. But anyway.
Yes, you'd be a heck of a recruiter. But, so it's your fault, not Joe's then. Joe, I'm sorry / kind of sort of not sorry because I know he's rolled his eyes, and that's exactly the reaction I was going for. Kidding aside, this has been a lot of fun, Natalie. Congratulations on all of your success. The Eclipse Award's coming up next week. You'll be getting your trophies at some point in the near future, I hope. Do you have a spot picked out yet?
Well, I think that I might continue to make room on my shelf back here. I've got some books on this end that I can take off, and I mean, who needs books? So that might be how we resolve the space issue on the mantelpiece, because there is actually kind of a space issue now. So,
well, it's a good problem to have, and if all else fails, if you ever fight with Joe, threaten to just put it in a garage somewhere.
Oh God, I would never. That would be the end.
Natalie Voss, great guest, great conversation. We really hope you've enjoyed this week's edition of Champagne and JD. If you like what we do, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our weekly shows. Next week is Pegasus World Cup Day. We'll be joined by Barry Spears to talk about the big card at Gulfstream Park. JD, get better soon. For Natalie Voss, I'm Andrew Champagne signing off. Catchphrase we end every show with, and it becomes a heck of a lot more apparent now considering what happened in Alabama after the Crimson Tide won the national championship and a whole mess of people packed into a really small area. Stay off the beaches, y'all.